Great timing. Thank you, Melissa. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Collaborative Summer Library Programs special inclusion webinar. I'm Kathy Lancaster. I'm with the Library of Michigan, but I'm also president-elect of the Collaborative Summer Library Program. So we're happy to see you all here with us today. CSLP empowers libraries to foster community. They provide inclusive literacy-based programming resources. We also share resources and offer professional support to you all through the Collaborative Summer Library Program. So we're very happy to have you all here today. Later on, you'll be able to access the slides and a handout on the Collaborative Summer Library Program's website. So that'll be at www.cslpreads.org/summer-symposium. So you'll be able to find that all on our website later on, and we'll also be emailing registrants with the recording link once we have it closed captioned. So welcome again to CSLP. I see we've got more folks jumping on here, and so we're going to get going. I'm going to pass the baton here to Jen Taggart. Jen is the Youth Services head at the Bloomfield Township Public Library right here in Michigan, but she's also our fabulous inclusion chair for the Collaborative Summer Library Program. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So I am so excited to introduce our speaker for today's program. Amanda Erickson has worked with the Kaleidoscope Youth Center since 2017, focusing on advocating for LGBTQIA plus youth across Ohio through education for youth serving professionals, including teachers, social workers, librarians, and more. Amanda holds a Bachelor of Science in Education from Bowling Green State University and spent 2 years post-college as a Peace Corps volunteer, educating teachers in the South Pacific. Before joining KYC, she taught sex education and life skills in the juvenile justice system and managed program partnerships for a regional youth serving organization. Amanda currently serves as a national volunteer partner with Girl Scouts of the USA, and she lives on a small urban farm in Columbus, Ohio, with her wife and 3 cats. Please welcome Amanda Erickson.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks for having me. And I feel like I should note, it's not in my bio, but I'm also a native of Michigan. So you have 3 Michiganders out of your 4 panelists this afternoon. So lucky for everyone here. But thanks so much for having me. We're here today to chat about inclusion of LGBTQ folks within your summer programs. And I'm coming to you from Kaleidoscope Youth Center in Columbus, Ohio. So Kaleidoscope is the largest and longest serving organization in Ohio that's solely dedicated to serving and supporting LGBTQ youth. We do that through a drop-in center for youth ages 12 to 20. So they can start coming on their 12th birthday, they age out on their 21st birthday. We have discussion groups, art night, movie and pizza night, just a safe space for young people to come together in community and be their full authentic selves. And then through our education and outreach program, we really are trying to create these safe spaces within everywhere else that young people are going during their daily lives, whether that's school, different after school programs, the library, their own homes, really trying to help folks understand best practices for working with LGBTQ youth and kind of where they're coming from in terms of gender and sexuality. I'll give all of our contact information at the end today, so please feel free to look us up and see what else we're up to in the Central Ohio area. So I want to start with some context as we move into today's talk, and you can think of this as the why we do what we do at Kaleidoscope. First, the historical and cultural context of sexual rights is one of persistent inequality, especially for queer communities and communities of color. And the history of mental health treatment of LGBTQ populations is really uneasy. LGBTQ identities have historically been considered mental illnesses that need to be cured or behaviors that were criminalized. And normalizing LGBTQ identities is still a huge task in today's society. You see the words historical and history on your screen. We're saying these words out loud. This is not ancient history. This is absolutely current events. We in Ohio, and you all across the country and other states as well, have legislatures that are full of anti-trans bills right now. We have folks, criminalizing folks for supporting trans youth. We have folks that are, outing trans youth to unsupportive family members and making life overall unsafe. And all of that is happening right now in 2022, moving into 2023. So we can't, pretend that this is all in history class. We can't pretend that things are so much better now, because we really are facing some huge challenges ahead of us. All of that prejudice and discrimination has strongly negative impacts on the health of young people, and that's both physical and mental health. LGBTQ discrimination, racism, sexism, all of the isms are rampant in all of the systems and institutions that young people engage with. So sometimes we think that, kids don't notice all of these isms around them because they are kids, right? Maybe we think we can shelter them from these types of oppression somehow. But all of this is absolutely affecting them in a lot of the same ways that it's affecting you and I, and some different ways as well. And then finally, our culture reflects ambivalent feelings on the rights of minors, which is a concept that we call adultism. So Americans believe, just as a culture, that adults know more than youth by default, that teenagers are rebellious, that youth and inexperience means that somebody isn't deserving of their own choices. We at Kaleidoscope Youth Center believe that all people, no matter how young they are the experts in their own experiences and should have control over their own private lives and their own futures. So our outcomes for today's session are that participants are going to learn about implicit bias, the complexity and depth of gender, and a brief explanation of acronyms. And then participants will be given strategies to create a welcoming environment in their library and their library's summer reading program for LGBTQ youth. So we're going to start with a breakdown of that LGBTQ acronym just to level set and get everyone on the same page. All of these terms are really easy to find with a quick internet search. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through them. Don't stress yourselves out trying to take too many notes. We'll make sure that we have some of that shared language as we move through the rest of the talk. Then we'll address bias and how it shows up in our lives and in our libraries. And then we'll talk about how to create safer spaces within our libraries and address making your summer programming inclusive and affirming. We'll take as many questions as we can at the very end of the session, so feel free to jot them down as we go, and then you can plug them in that Q&A box. So to start us off, let's review some of those definitions so we can use shared language for the duration of today's session. Starting really broadly, gender identity is a person's deep-seated internal sense of their own gender. Your gender identity is who you know yourself to be, regardless of your body parts. Sex assigned at birth is the one that we sort of define by using the term itself. It's the sex that was assigned to each person at their birth based on the appearance of their external reproductive anatomy. This sticks with you in the form of your birth certificate and general societal expectations of what you're supposed to be doing based on, gender stereotypes. Gender expression is the way that a person uses clothing, hairstyles, or other facets of their appearance to reflect their idea of gender. For some folks, that relies on stereotypes. And so then some people like to question, but what even is masculinity and femininity? But for others, their gender expression is integral to their sense of self and really important to keep around. Sexual orientation is a person's sexual, emotional, physical, and psychological attraction to other people. It's about who you like. We can also separate sexual attraction from romantic attraction, though we often use sexual attraction as just an umbrella term. Everyone has a gender identity and a sexual orientation. So thinking about these different definitions, remember that these are two separate things. There are several different acronyms that can be used to describe the community, and at Kaleidoscope, we use LGBTQIA+. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and others who are not cisgender or heterosexual. That was a lot of terms that I threw at you. At this point, most folks have a good idea of what lesbian, gay, and bisexual mean, so we'll start at the T. Transgender describes someone whose gender identity does not align with the sex that they were assigned at birth. Maybe they were assigned male at birth, but today they identify as a woman. We would consider them to be a transgender woman. Queer is a reclaimed term, which means it was used in derogatory ways in the past and could still be with ill intent. But language constantly evolves, and LGBTQIA+ labels are no different. In 2022, queer is generally understood to be an umbrella term to help describe someone who's not cisgender and heterosexual. Because it's a reclaimed term, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to use it. But if someone wants to identify as queer, that's their prerogative, and we can't force them not to. Part of what's cool about the term queer is that it describes both gender identities and sexual orientations rather than just one, like transgender, or the other, like gay. The Q in the LGBTQIA+ acronym can also stand for questioning, as in someone is questioning their gender identity or sexual orientation. This, though, is also a great way to use the term queer. Because it's such an umbrella term, it can serve to mean, I don't really have a label for myself, but I know I'm not straight, so queer or questioning. Sometimes you'll see this acronym with 2 Qs listed. Intersex is a combination of anatomy, chromosomes, and hormones that makes it difficult to categorize someone as male or female. Some intersex people are trans and some are not. The intersex label itself is not related to gender identity, only biological makeup. And it's important to include and understand because the existence of intersex people disproves the claim that there are only 2 sexes. Asexual is a term used to describe someone who does not experience sexual attraction toward other people, regardless of gender. Asexuality is a spectrum as well. Gender nonconforming is not necessarily listed in the LGBTQIA+ acronym, but we talk about it quite a lot when we're talking about inclusive programming. So gender nonconforming is when someone's behavior or expression doesn't match societal expectations of masculinity or femininity. And those societal expectations are usually connected to the sex that they were assigned at birth. So an example of someone who is gender nonconforming would be a butch identity in queer culture, someone who identifies as a woman, but has a very masculine gender expression. Not all gender nonconforming people identify as queer. Anyone should be able to express themselves however they like. And then finally, cisgender is not a part of the LGBTQ acronym, but I want to define it for us here to make sure that we're all on the same page. Someone who is cisgender has a gender identity that aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So since I was assigned female at birth and I identify as a woman, those things align and I am cisgender. Again, I realize that's a lot of terms that I'm throwing at you. Please feel free to watch this recording later on when it's posted online or find any of these terms online after this as well. There are sometimes different definitions for different sorts of terms, but that's kind of the cool thing about language and this field is that there's no one right answer to anything. There's a lot of, gray area where people are having conversations about what any of this even means. So thinking about bias, right? When we talk about bias, we're talking about those subconscious ideas and associations that cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people based on characteristics like race, ethnicity, age, and appearance. Those ideas and associations develop over the course of a lifetime, beginning at a really early age through exposure to direct and indirect messages. There are some key characteristics when we think about biases. First, they're pervasive. Everyone has them. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person. You cannot be an unbiased person. Like, they don't exist. Implicit bias is related to but distinct from explicit bias. And really, we can just think about those root words implicit and explicit. Implicit being probably more subconscious, more kind of subtle, whereas explicit is really more kind of in your face or something that we're doing externally. Our biases are not necessarily aligned with our declared beliefs. So you might say you have an opinion on something, but then you act in a slightly different way due to a bias that you may not even know that you have. Our biases generally favor our own in-group. So for example, able-bodied people don't often consider the experiences of disabled people and may actually have a subconscious bias against them. I, as a lesbian, would much rather hang out with other queer folks than a room of mostly cisgender straight folks. That's a bias I have in favor of LGBTQ individuals as my in-group. Biases can be unlearned through education, attention, and work, and like attending webinars like these. We can look at biases in a few different ways, one of which is to consider the different levels of bias. So individual bias might be known as prejudice, microaggressions, or bigotry at a really extreme level. An individual bias in a library setting might be when someone says it's just too hard to accommodate everyone, signaling that LGBTQ folks should be left out of some kind of programming or some kind of other messaging. Maybe a community member says that the library shouldn't include materials that are inclusive of LGBTQ people. So in this case, these are individual people that are expressing these views and hoping that a library, takes a stance on it somehow. Organizational bias is generally known as discrimination. And an easy example here is when a library, as an organization, doesn't provide an all genders restroom and doesn't have a policy that allows patrons to use the restroom that they feel safest in, right? That's creating an unnecessary barrier for folks to be able to access those services. And a systemic bias is an ism, like racism, sexism, or homophobia, which uses the suffix phobia, but we know it as an ism. An example here would be libraries across the country being targeted by anti-LGBTQ groups and therefore forced to change their programming. So it's, this change in programming that may be seen as a systemic barrier to folks accessing services. And really it's kind of that targeted, organized action by anti-LGBTQ groups that we can see as that ism. So where are we going with all of this, right? What is your role here? Your role as a librarian, a community member, is to be a disruptor of this bias. So you can do this by pausing when you recognize the bias within yourself or in others. Give it a minute to come to light rather than, steamrolling on with your conversation or action. Pause and think, reflect. Engage in conversation, whether it's, that internal reflection with yourself or conversation with another person. Consider the why and the how, and talk through what it might mean to challenge that bias moving forward. Be an ally in the moment, react to other people's prejudice or discrimination, and stand up for your community members when something happens. And create safer spaces proactively so that bias has less of a chance to rear its head. Part of your role as a librarian, especially working with young people, is just being a safe adult. That means disrupting bias. It means being an ally when it's needed. And it means proactively creating those safe spaces. Youth see you as an adult with some authority, but as sort of some middle ground between peers, family members, and teachers. As more schools start enacting discriminatory policies that force staff members to out students to their parents, you might see more of an increase in students choosing you as their confidant rather than a teacher. Librarians can be safe adults. The library is a haven. So to create safer spaces within our library programs, here are some things we need to consider. First, understand diversity within the LGBTQ community. So there are 5 different letters just right there, LGBT and Q. We already talked about the IA+, and I mentioned also that that acronym can go further in other contexts. Then when we start adding the intersections of race, sex, class, and ability, we have infinite experiences, backgrounds, and different people with different needs. So we want to avoid making assumptions. We never want to assume someone's pronouns or gender, just like we don't assume their name or age. If someone were to come in my office right now and I say, oh, hey, George, how can I help you? Right? And he says, my name's not George, it's Henry. And I'm like, cool, well, I just looked at you and you looked like a George to me. So that's why I called you George, right? Like that doesn't make sense. That's not something that we do. But when it comes to talking about pronouns, that's absolutely something that we do. We see someone with long hair and jewelry and makeup wearing a dress, and we automatically call that person she or her when we could be wrong, right? And we could just ask. Use inclusive, non-gender specific language that doesn't assume heterosexuality. So we can use words like partner, significant other, parents, students, friends. Think about the other ways that people who work with children constantly gender them, right? How often do you say or hear boys and girls or ladies and gentlemen? And what can you say instead? Pay attention to how you use gender in other ways. Do you consistently allow for boys versus girls in competition? Or have you seen on school playgrounds, for example, when children are asked to line up by gender? And think about why this could be problematic, right? Maybe you have a young person who is not feeling like they're really vibing with the sex that they were assigned at birth. And so really they would like to go in one line, but their teacher is saying, hey, no, get in the right line, come over here. Like you're expected to be in this other line. Maybe you're meeting someone who identifies as non-binary, which is neither a girl nor a boy. And so they're sitting there thinking, cool, well, which team am I on? Which line do I go in? Right? How else can we divide up students to make sure that they're all feeling supported and heard? We want to support young people who come out to you. Thank them for trusting you. Ask if it's confidential information. Keep it confidential if it is. And find out if there's anything specific they need from you. Maybe to watch out for other youth behavior, to change something about your language, and then do your best to provide that support. Respond to anti-LGBTQ language and behaviors every single time. Be a disruptor. Jump in as soon as you hear it and become a broken record. We hear so many reports from students about bullying in the hallway that teachers just literally walk past. We are all tired. It is hard work, but kids need someone to have their backs. And treat the topic of sexual orientation just like any other aspect of human diversity. Talking about LGBTQ identities is not sex ed. And there's this really unfortunate kind of societal tendency to sexualize everything related to LGBTQ identities, which is not the point. It's not what we're talking about, right? And so we need to be able to talk about diversity and respect and family structures and love and all of those things that are not sex in age appropriate ways, making sure that, you know, kids are getting this kind of representation and this kind of exposure. We also don't want to discourage youth from talking about LGBTQ identities either, right? Just make sure that whatever conversation you overhear that's happening is respectful and continues moving in a respectful direction. If it's not respectful of LGBTQ folks, that's when you get to jump in and start calling out that behavior. So let's consider how you use language in your programming, right? Part of that can be normalizing pronoun use. As a quick pronoun review, I know we've talked a little bit about it already, but just kind of to level set, pronouns are words that we use to describe people when we don't use their name. We all have pronouns. Take a minute to think about your own. Right? We often assume what pronouns someone uses based on how we perceive their gender identity. Right? But that's not best practice. This is a great example of gender bias, that subconscious association of language based on someone's appearance. But again, if we can't assume someone's name, we shouldn't be assuming their pronouns either. You can normalize pronoun use by offering your own pronouns, right? So for example, my name is Amanda Erickson and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And by offering places for your young people to give theirs. If a patron tells you a pronoun that is something different than what you assumed or expected or have heard of, just affirm them by using their correct pronouns at all times. If using they, them in a singular context throws you off, practice. All it takes is practice. It's kind of like that saying where they say to remember someone's name, you should repeat it to yourself 5 times, right? Do the same thing, but with pronouns. Tell yourself stories about that person in your own head using the correct pronouns. And that way, when you're actually talking about them, you have a better chance at getting it right. If you haven't met someone using they, them pronouns yet, I promise you absolutely will. A new study just actually found out that 1 in 4 LGBTQ young people uses a gender neutral pronoun. So that's a massive number. If you mess up somebody's pronouns, right? It's okay. It's not the end of the world. If they've corrected you themselves, thank them for that correction and move on, right? You can apologize quickly and simply with a quick sorry, move on and do better next time. Do not center yourself, right? Oftentimes when we apologize, we're expecting some sort of like, oh, that's okay, or oh, don't worry about it, or some reaction like that in return. That's really problematic, right? When you actually stop to think about it, why should someone have to tell us that a harm that we cause is okay? Because it's not really okay. Right? Often we also hear from young people that adults tend to dwell on that apology because of their own feelings, right? You misgender someone, you use the wrong pronouns, you feel terrible about it. And so you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You have to understand how hard this is for me. I'm just not used to using they, them in a singular context. My mind still thinks it's a plural. I'm doing my best. I've always known you as this name with these pronouns, and it's hard to switch to these other pronouns and blah, 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 blah. And the kid is like, okay, can I go to the bathroom? Like, because that's what I was asking for. They really just want you to fix the problem and move on. And so thank them for that correction. Sorry if you really need to, and then move on and do better next time. If that student stops correcting you, that's when there's a problem, right? If they're correcting that pronoun use, they still have hope that you're going to change. But at some point, if someone continues to mess up, they'll just stop correcting that person and they'll just deal with it, because it's easier for them to just move on themselves than it is to keep taking that emotional labor to create that correction. So that's partly why thanking them for the correction is so important. And then moving on and doing better is equally important so that they don't have to continue asking for that. We want to make sure that we're using inclusive materials. So consider maybe what's not necessarily being covered at school, which is more and more all the time. Maybe find some material about queer historical figures, about queer history and the gay liberation movement. Research the fact and fiction about human biology. Include materials and conversations about diverse chromosome makeup or the animal species that quote unquote change sexes. Inclusive materials can also mean just the book lists that you provide to patrons, book displays, and the material that you consume within your own home with your own family, right? Seek out the experts that can help you find that kind of material as well. Visibly affirming staff is really important for making safe spaces, maybe making sure that this type of training is mandatory for all of your staff. Bring education like this to your library location. Kaleidoscope does a lot of in-person trainings. I've been to several of our libraries here in Ohio. There are other similar organizations all over the country that are doing this type of training, and Zoom makes it possible for us to all meet each other wherever we're at. Right? Go even further with your own education. And this is an extremely basic level training. Part of the reason I don't get to go much deeper is that I have to assume everyone's starting off in that really basic place. But you can take that further on your own time. Have conversations with your peers to dig even deeper. And then if you don't already have one, get a comprehensive anti-bullying and anti-discrimination policy on the books. Right? That word comprehensive means that it would include gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation as protected classes, along with race, ethnicity, religion, whatever else is usually in one of those policies based on law. An anti-discrimination policy could be, on display within the library, on a welcome board at the checkout desk, so that the entire community knows where you stand and a positive example is set. Sure, you might get pushback, but really think about the fact that the folks pushing back are literally asking you to discriminate against others. So which side of the argument would you like to be on? Thinking about building logistics, are gender neutral restrooms available? In many of our Columbus Metropolitan Library locations, there's a single stall family restroom that individuals are also allowed to use, though sometimes there's the added barrier of having to ask for a key. If that's the case for you as well, think about how you can start to minimize those barriers. In some small town libraries, there may be only 2 restrooms and they're both single stall. If that's the case and privacy is inherent in the building design, why not make both restrooms all gender? Why label them? If one has a urinal and one doesn't, make that the label. Put a sign with a toilet on one and a sign with a toilet and a urinal on the other. I want to stress that this is actually a health issue for a lot of transgender and gender nonconforming people. We hear from students who avoid eating and drinking all day long in order to not use the restroom. Think about what that does to a growing body, right? If you're depriving it of food and water for 8, 9, 10 hours out of the day, just so that you don't have to use the facilities. They need a private space where they can use the facilities safely. Representation in materials that we talked about previously should also extend to external communication, marketing, and images. When you advertise for story time, for example, do you include photos of families? Do any of those families have 2 moms or 2 dads? I notice every time a company or organization includes visibly queer folks in their marketing, every time. My wife and I will be sitting on the couch watching TV and be like, look, gay people, when there's a commercial for a dating website or family insurance or whatever it is that highlights a family with 2 moms. And then have information ready to go for your LGBTQ students when they approach you for it. Have it at the ready. Kaleidoscope Youth Center is a very specific nonprofit organization with only 1 brick and mortar location here in Columbus, Ohio, but there are centers similar to ours all over the country, as well as centers for adults or for all ages. There are LGBTQ affirming therapists and healthcare providers throughout the country, support groups meeting in person and virtually. Find out what these are for your area, and this will take some digging. A lot of promotion within the LGBTQ community happens via word of mouth because that's our culture, so to speak. We're used to functioning on the down low, and we're not always likely to be out tooting our own horns. So sometimes folks, think, oh, something like this doesn't exist in my area, right? Get on Google and do some digging. You might be surprised. Then you can be the one to provide the information to a queer kid who also thinks, oh, there's nothing in my area. Right? So I want to talk for a minute about how to find those materials, which some of this may be total review for everyone on this call, but just on the off chance that it's not, I want to make sure that we visit some of these. I will forever and always recommend the American Library Association GLBT Roundtable Rainbow Book List, right? Again, y'all are librarians. I feel like you're probably already aware of the wealth of information there, but just in case, we will be providing a small document of this in the session materials links. And get on their website and find all of the stuff from previous years. I send this website to librarians and teachers even all the time, just to start thinking about age appropriate ways to introduce LGBTQ themes into, the classroom, whatever it happens to be. Make sure that you're paying attention to the content of books, even if they're not labeled as LGBTQ. There are probably some great children's and YA books out there that have a queer character, but since it's not part of the main storyline, it doesn't get the attention, right? And think about materials like that for incorporating inclusion in a way that doesn't draw attention. So it might theoretically be safer, right, than some of the really obvious books that people are, singing the praises of, but are showing up on banned books lists. Remember that many LGBTQ-centered books have historically been self-published or published by small independent publishers rather than mainstream publishers that won't take the risk of having that material. And crowdsource using recommendation sites like Goodreads or even social media or whatever librarians use. My wife and I are in a Facebook group about sapphic romance novels with like thousands of users posting multiple questions and recommendations per day. And then also remember to be weeding out your old materials. This is a very quickly moving field, and it's important to get rid of books that might be out of date or unaffirming towards LGBTQ folks, especially when I think about like self-help books for parents, how to affirm your LGBTQ kid, right? If that is more than 10 years old, it's practically ancient. And so we want to make sure that if we're providing resources like that, we're really paying attention to what that content is and how old it is and whether or not it's still relevant. And then what about programs that are specific to LGBTQ audiences? Right? Everything that I covered already is really like your library and your programs, making sure that it's all inclusive. But there are quite a few ways that libraries can incorporate programs that focus on gender, pride, and community. Think about using your space to host a community training. I've had libraries invite me to teach an LGBTQ 101 session, and then they invite anyone from the community who has an interest in learning more. Similarly, I've had community organizations that will plan the event and book the library's meeting room to hold the session. Think about other ways that you can use your space to gather people. A GSA is a gender and sexuality alliance, shifting from gay straight alliance in previous years, but are generally student-run extracurricular clubs held after school at a middle school or high school. On occasion, though, those groups are held at a library or other community location. Maybe there are several schools near each other and they'd like to combine forces at a central location. Maybe a club feels threatened by the school culture and knows that the library might be able to keep them safer than they would be kept after school on the school grounds. Or maybe there isn't a teacher able or willing to take on the role of supervising the group, but there is a teen services librarian who's totally into it and can incorporate it into their regular duties and schedule. Do you host book clubs, feature an LGBTQ book, host movie screenings? You know where I'm going with this. And story times should also be incorporating inclusive material. The photo that I have here is a drag queen story time, which is probably a program that's familiar to many of you, even if you haven't hosted an event. These are really cool opportunities for kids to experience an age-appropriate part of the queer community in a safe space. I want to stress, though, that it doesn't have to be Pride Month or Drag Queen Story Time to be considered LGBTQ inclusive. Everything we've covered today, up until that very last slide, was generic information that you can and should be applying to your library as a whole and all of your programs. Pronouns are not a queer thing, they're an everyone thing, right? Everyone has pronouns, and you can be creating these opportunities for education and affirmation in daily life. Inclusive materials should be around all the time, not just at Pride Month. The presence of a drag queen does not solve a lack of gender neutral restrooms or a culture of adultism. We should all be striving to make everything we do more inclusive of everyone at all times. So I'm passing it over to you for a few minutes to really think about your action steps, right? So I've been talking at you for about 35 minutes. And I'm curious, what are some individual changes that you can resolve to make moving forward? Jot yourself down a little list, like what are some things that I talked about today that you feel like you should start doing or stop doing or try to remember to do more often in the future to make sure that you're creating those safe spaces in your programming. And then think about some organizational changes that could be taken, right? So these are the types of things that may feel like, oh, that's so far above my pay grade. I don't have any power over that, right? But they may be organizational changes for like your whole library system, your whole location, whatever that means to you, that you feel like you could advocate for. You could talk to somebody with a little more authority with you and say, hey, I think we should try to have this conversation more, or I think this is a change we should try making in our library. What would it take to do that? Right? And think about those kinds of things that kind of get you out of your comfort zone, but start making some real change. So we're at 2:41. I think we have about 19 minutes left. And so I want to open up for questions if you have questions. And I know we've only, y'all were so great at keeping your questions till the end that I only see one question in the Q&A so far. So nice. So I can go ahead and answer this one that's in here. Awesome. And yep, if more pop up as I'm talking, that's fantastic too. This is a great time to ask those questions. So Sharon's asking, what do you think of Z, zir for pronouns? My daughter lives abroad and says they are common instead of the singular they. Absolutely. So great question. When it comes to pronouns, most of us are, well, we all know she, her, hers, and he, him, his, right? Many of us are also familiar with the singular they, them, theirs. This is a great option for folks who have non-binary identities, folks who would rather use a gender neutral pronoun than a pronoun that's more tied to a specific gender like she or he. And then there's a whole different set of pronouns that we call neo-pronouns, N-E-O. So that prefix neo means new. They're not new, but they are new in mainstream society. So for example, when I started working at Kaleidoscope, I met a few people who used neo-pronouns. They all also worked in this field of diversity and inclusion, LGBTQ education, all of that kind of stuff. But I wasn't hearing any of it out in, the regular world. In the past couple of years, I think the use of neo-pronouns amongst young people has really skyrocketed. And I think we can attribute part of that to mostly being virtual during the pandemic. When we all went virtual in 2020, young people suddenly had a much, much, much bigger community to tap into than they had ever felt that they had before through the spaces that they were accessing online. And so they were meeting more young people with similar identities, similar experiences, and learning more about all of those different identities, neo-pronouns, different labels, those kinds of things. And so we've seen language shift happen faster in the past 2 years than we did before that. So we do have young people at Kaleidoscope using Z, zir, zirs, Z, here, heres, fey, fair, fairs, I think, they, dem, dares, like these pronouns that you won't have heard out in necessarily your world, but are often kind of in a queer bubble. And when you hear somebody introduce themselves with pronouns like that, you can say something like, oh, that's cool. I haven't heard that one before. Can you tell me how to spell it? Can you please help me use it? I'm going to do my best to use that to describe you. And I might mess up because I've never done it before. So please correct me if I get it wrong. And I promise I'm doing my best, right? It doesn't give you permission to mess up continually. It kind of gives you that, ability to humble yourself with the person that you're talking to and let them know that you are really doing your best and then actually, try your best. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I find a lot of young people, when they are using neo-pronouns, they also are aware that adults are a little bit more behind what's actually happening with those. And they'll be like, oh, you can just, call me they, them, theirs. Right. And then if you have gotten used to using that gender neutral singular they, you're golden. Like you should be able to use that as a backup when you're feeling like really confused about something.
So Amanda, we have another question. What kinds of flags / designs are appropriate to use when trying to make a visibly affirming environment?
Good question. I know a lot of people default to rainbow flags, which I think is fine. So the flag I have behind me, I guess y'all can see me, is the progress flag, which has the trans flag colors in that triangle. And then it's got the black and brown as part of the Philadelphia Pride flag, which represents people of color, and then the rainbow underneath it. I think that is a great one to use to really be intentional about including the trans community and community members of color. I think you can also think about, we want to have pride displays at times of year that are not just Pride. But if you are focusing outside of June, like there are other holidays and other days that have events about the LGBTQ community that you might be able to zero in on. So for example, last week was Trans Awareness Week. So it would have been a great time to have trans flags on display. And that's that like baby pink, baby blue, and white. Each of the like specific identities often has its own special awareness day. So like there is an asexual awareness day or week. Asexual and aromantic have their own flags. And so it kind of depends on what you're doing and when it is. If you want to tie it to dates, like focus in on what's actually being recognized during that time. And then I think like any of the pride flags, really, like youth get so excited to see their own pride flag, like, oh my gosh, that one is mine, whether it's non-binary and they're so used to just seeing a rainbow, like it's really exciting when you then see your own specific one. So I feel like you probably couldn't go wrong with this. And if you do go wrong, like one person is going to be like, hey, I don't think you should use this flag, and here's why. And hopefully that's a respectful conversation and y'all can learn from it and be like, cool, we won't use it again. Which honestly, like we have those kind of conversations at Kaleidoscope too, because we don't have all of the answers. And so maybe we put something up and a 15-year-old is more in tune with what's going on really than we are and comes in and says, hey, y'all should take that down. And we're like, cool, why? Like, tell us about this. So always be open to those conversations.
Okay, and next question is, what is your advice on combating pushback from LGBTQ inclusive program from administration? I found it difficult in the past to hold programs because of pushback from those with higher positions.
And Amanda, I'll also add that there's similar questions in the chat here about boards as well as their directors and administration. So if you could.
Awesome. I think it's really important to remember and to remind boards that libraries are public institutions. And because of that, like the public literally means all of the people in your community. And if you are a public institution, it's your responsibility to provide services to all of the people in your community. And part of that responsibility is representation of all people, is removing barriers to certain groups from using your spaces and facilities and locations. And so I think when there is any kind of pushback, that risk is that you're no longer serving the public. And if you're not serving the public, what are you doing as a library, right? And so I don't necessarily have an answer for how to deal with it every time, but I think that's an important conversation to have and an important way to frame that conversation. And I think it's a place where you can be curious about where they're coming from and get them to explain it to you. And, to simplify this even further, like think about hearing a discriminatory remark or hearing, I don't know, a racist joke, right? And your answer to that might be like, I don't get it. Can you explain it to me? Tell me why that's funny, right? That's something that works for a lot of people and ways that they can be an ally in those situations. I think when we parallel that to The library system to inclusion of various groups of people, I think you can ask questions about, why don't you think that this inclusion is a good idea? Why can't we celebrate Pride Month? Why can't I purchase these materials for the teen section? Why can't I hang a rainbow flag on the wall? And if you have that anti-discrimination policy as well, you can highlight that and say, well, we wrote this policy, we have this guidance that we're supposed to be following. Can you tell me how I can follow this guidance if I also am not allowed to do X thing? And I think if you can look at those situations in those ways, ask those questions and really come at it as we're a public institution and we're here to serve everyone, I think you can start those conversations and you can get people to be thinking about those things. I will also tell you that a lot of the pushback that you're experiencing is organized. There are groups of a certain political persuasion that have organized themselves together and created really good strategy for basically erasing LGBTQ folks from the public eye. They are starting with schools. I think libraries are their next step. And so I think y'all are just starting to feel what schools have been dealing with for the past year or so, which I have been to more school board meetings in the past 3 months than I ever attended previously in my life. And so I think that's important to think about too, is there are major powers at play that are making people like administration and boards feel like they have to take a position on something, even if it's not a great position and even if it's not something that they totally agree with, right? They are feeling pressure and they are turning that into pressure on you all who are working at the library. I hope that made sense. I'm like, making it up as I go along, but it's tough out there.
We are definitely experiencing that here in Michigan for sure.
Yeah.
We have quite a few questions on pronouns, which I think we'll try to save a little bit more. We have some great resources out there.
Cool.
But I did notice one question that popped up that I think we should address is having labels on our books. So someone wants to know what you recommend as far as labeling books. They have LGBTQ plus stickers for books, such as they do mystery and science fiction. So they want people to be able to look for that when browsing. However, they don't want that label to hinder people from taking those books home either. What are your thoughts on that, Amanda?
That is a great question. I actually had a slide about that and I took it out for the sake of time. I wish I had left it in. I think there are pros and cons both ways. I'm pretty sure Columbus Library does not have labels, but Southwest City Library, which borders Columbus and which my wife and I used to live within the bounds of, did. And so it was super, my wife is the bookworm in the family. She would go in and find the books with a little rainbow at the bottom and just pull them off the shelf and go. And it was super easy. I think when we're talking about youth in particular, I can see how that kind of locating the books would be helpful. But young people actually are less likely to actually check out the book or take the book home with them if it is labeled, especially if they're in an unsafe space. So we have to consider that youth are more likely to still be closeted than adults. And what does that label look like and how visible is it? So pros and cons, we want them to be able to find it, but for teenagers especially, they don't necessarily want people to be able to see that they're reading a book that has a big rainbow on it. So I think it's up to you. I think it's, there's no one right answer, but those are kind of my thoughts on the ways that folks are managing that. Maybe, a happy medium is making sure that you have a book list and making that book list super, super accessible so that the books themselves don't have to be labeled, but like it's really, really clear and easy for folks to be able to find the books that are on that list.
Okay, Amanda, I have so this is also a very timely session, as many of us are aware of the happenings in Colorado a few days ago. And this question is regarding that. This person is from Colorado, and she says, I'm from Colorado. We're dealing with the emotional shock of the Club Q attack.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, is the best way for librarians and other grown-ups who get it to respond when their LGBTQIA plus kids are faced with things like this?
That is a great question. I think if you have, regular programming that young people are coming to, if you have existing relationships with young people, I think that it can be important just to check in on them and hold space if they want you to hold space. That doesn't have to be over the top. It can be as simple as, hey, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you would like to chat. And then maybe you never hear from them, but like, that's okay. You did it. You provided the support that might be needed in that moment. I think what has really struck me about all of that is like, turning on the news and seeing like reporters saying like, oh, the main question in everyone's mind tonight is why. And I think like, while it's incomprehensible that something like that would happen, like we're all seeing the same media and we're all hearing the same vitriol out there. And so it kind of shocks me that people would still be questioning why. And I think young people are seeing that too. Like things don't have to directly happen to you for you to feel that impact. None of the trans bills have to pass for us to be feeling the impact. The conversation is already happening. And the bills and the violence are, allowing those conversations to continue moving in a negative direction. And so just being there as the adult force who's saying, let me know if you need support. How are you doing? What can I do for you? I think can do a lot more than we often give it credit for. And we can't necessarily fix the problem, but just showing that we're there can be a support.
Thank you. Let me see here. So I want to ask this one here from somebody asking about a question about asking people to state their pronouns. From past experience, I know that an environment where everyone has to go around and declare their pronouns can actually be more of a curse than a blessing when it forces somebody to either out themselves in an environment they may not want to, or lie because they are uncomfortable. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on this for teen events? Encouraging
Absolutely.
freedom to share pronouns, but making it optional?
Yeah. Yep. I think that's the best answer. Introducing yourself with your own pronouns can be the most important thing. Even more important than asking someone else for their pronouns, because you've at least opened the door, right? We never want to mandate anyone in the room to give their pronouns, because that can create an unsafe situation. It can not forcibly out, but make someone feel like they need to out themselves in that situation when they may not be ready to. So I think you can always ask folks for their pronouns one-on-one. Hey, my name is Amanda. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. What's your name? What pronouns do you use? Right? In that private one-on-one conversation. If you're in a whole teen program and you have some kind of introduction period, at Kaleidoscope, we do like every day at 5 o'clock, we do names and pronouns, a highlight and low light of the day, and some kind of add-on question, right? Maybe you give them all of those options. And if they want to skip pronouns, that's fine, right? And create that culture where like, if they skip part of the check-in, It's fine. Nobody's like going back at them like, oh, you forgot a low light, you forgot your pronouns, you forgot to say this, but just like whatever of this list you feel comfortable sharing, share with the rest of the group.
Awesome. And I know we are at time now. Kathy, do we want to continue a little bit longer with questions, or do we want to stop here and save questions for email later?
We can answer a couple more, I think, if Amanda has the time.
Sure. We could take like 2 more.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let me scroll back up here. Okay, here's one. So we talked about public libraries, what we can do, but this is a question from a librarian at a school. What are some ways I can advocate for this community when I'm a librarian at a very conservative school?
That is a really good question. Actually just reached across my desk to another resource. I found a resource recently, and I don't remember if I put it in the Dropbox file. So if I forgot about that, my apologies, but I'll tell you all about it right now. It's from the National School Library Standards. And it's about, what I have on my desk is an infographic that's about building and safeguarding your school's LGBTQ collection, but it's tied to a whole report, which I think I did put in that Dropbox, but I would start there. It's from the American Association of School Librarians. And I think that is going to have some of the information that might help you out. I, as not an expert in libraries, can only give, the LGBTQ side of this. But I think it's important to have the conversations about who's being represented in books. It's important to have the conversations about what's age appropriate, because again, they want to sexualize all of this, and very little of it has anything to do with sex, right? And there are parents showing up at school board meetings, like reading out loud the parts that are about sex, because they're young adult novels. Some of them do have sex in them, right? So I think figuring out that age appropriate piece, figuring out the representation in your school and in your library can be important. And then check out those resources. So again, this is building and safeguarding your school's LGBTQ collection. And if you're a public school, same thing goes as a public library, where like you're a public institution and you are there to serve all students, right? And that's something that people keep reminding school boards as like, public schools, as like your responsibility is to every student. And some of those students have LGBTQ identities. And some of those students have parents who have LGBTQ identities too. So when they start talking, parents' rights to their kids' education, okay, well, what about an LGBTQ parent's right to their kids' education as well? And let's have these broader conversations.
Okay, and one more question here. Do you have any tips or strategies for working with coworkers and administration who are not aware of their implicit bias?
I think it depends on your relationship with them, and it depends on how that implicit bias manifests in their daily actions. So if they are, making an offhand comment, I think this is your opportunity to say, I didn't think that was appropriate. Or why did you think that was funny? Can you explain it to me? Or here's why I don't think you should say that in the work environment, right? If it's something you're just aware of, but they're not necessarily saying out loud, I think resource sharing can be fun. Like, oh, hey, I came across this article and I thought it was really interesting, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Give it a read when you have a chance, right? And give them something like, I don't know, building and safeguarding your school's LGBTQ collection or something. Just kind of get that education in their hands. And yeah, open those conversations. And I think that's something that you can do with other folks as well, not just your workplace, but you know, when we see family members on social media making comments that we're like, oh, is that how you feel about that situation? You know, asking those questions, having those conversations, and providing educational materials, and then offering to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. All right. Do we want to
Go for
Kathy,
one more.
go for one more? One more? Okay. All right. Let me see here. Hard to choose here. Okay. Okay. How would you encourage libraries to be inclusive in programming and policies when we are already receiving serious backlash for LGBTQ materials we currently have?
Yeah. I think just keep all those conversations open. And I think it's okay to recognize that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm not here to tell you to do all of these things tomorrow. And there is probably no one single library that is doing everything right. So I think that it's okay to recognize where you are in that journey to inclusion and recognize the barriers in place that are preventing you from getting all the way there, and just like chip away at those barriers incrementally. You know, oh, well, we don't have gender inclusive restrooms, but I do have my pronouns on my name tag. Or, you know, I can't have this particular banned book about queer teenagers, but I do have this other book about a kid with two moms, right? Like count the little victories and keep chipping away at stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Kathy, how are we?
Well, we have a lot of questions still coming in, so we're making sure we jot those down. I think we'll try to put them up on our website in the near future, along with the resources from Amanda today. So I'll let you close us today, Jen, but a quick reminder to everyone that our summer symposium is on December 8th. Well, it starts at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, but please do join us for the summer symposium. And Jen, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for your time today and sharing these wonderful resources with us. That is so needed. And I want to encourage all of you to check out the CSLP's website. There are some inclusion resources on there. This session has been recorded, and it will be shared on that page of the website as well. So please be sure to check that out, as it will be having captioning added to it as well. So thank you all for your time today. And everybody have a wonderful afternoon.